Do you hear that? Calming, isn't it? It instantly puts you into ease. The fresh, cool forest air, the scent of moss and earth, a trip into the green, full of life and death. Death? I'm Jonas Gruber, and today we're talking about something that seems pretty lifeless at first. Deadwood. Yes, you heard right. Dead trees, fallen branches, rotting trunks, they are often considered forest trash. And trash has to go, right? A messy forest. Who wants to fight their way through underbush, tearing clothes, scratching arms and legs, tripping over branches, dodging fallen trees? But in reality, Deadwood is far more important than most people think. Let's take a closer look at why that is. First, we need to answer the question, what exactly is deadwood? Deadwood, simply put, is dead wood. It can be a whole, dried up tree still standing, lying on the ground, broken or fallen, or a tree stump just waiting to trip someone. Even parts of an otherwise healthy tree can die. But how does deadwood form? What happens inside a tree when it dies? There are two main causes, nature and humans. The natural factors include abiotic environmental influences, meaning those not directly caused by living organisms, like storms, drought, lightning strikes, fire, and especially in forests, lack of light. Towering canopies battle for every sunbeam, darkening everything below them. If you don't grow fast or tall enough, you miss out and starve. Without sunlight, photosynthesis can occur, the process where trees turn sunlight, CO2 and water, into sugars and oxygen. Lack of light is also why tree trunks in forests are typically bare from the ground up. The expensive crowns don't even let light reach their own lower branches, so those die and eventually fall off. Because competition for light in the forest mainly comes from other trees, it can also be counted as biotic factor. Water shortage, for instance, during droughts has a similar effect. To avoid drying out, trees close the tiny pores in their leaves or needles, called stomata, to reduce water loss. But closed stomata also mean no CO2 intake, which is essential for photosynthesis. Interestingly, water evaporating through these pores is essential to a tree's survival. This process, called transpiration, creates suction that pulls water from the roots up to the leaves, automatically and with minimal energy use. Transpiration is also the reason why forest air feels so cool and humid. In just one summer day, between 700 and 3,500 liters of water can be evaporated per tree. So inside the wood, thin water columns run from the roots to the leaves. But if there's too little water in the soil, the tree may suck in air instead, forming air bubbles called embolisms that block the whole system. Once formed, an embolism stops water flow permanently. In times of water shortage, a tree starves and thirsts to death at the same time. But not all tree species are equally prone to embolisms. Research into their resistance is key in coping with global warming. We need to know now which tree species can handle drought better in order to preserve forests for the future. Another abiotic factor that contributes to tree mortality is pollution. Ozone or sulfur dioxide in the air can disturb physiological processes in trees and, for example, lead to leaf death and defoliation, leaf drop. Microplastics can also be detected in trees. These can be absorbed by the roots through the water transport system or by the leaves from the air through the stomata, and then remain in the tree. For example, in leaf hairs, also called trichomes. There, they expose the tree to potentially toxic chemicals or interfere with biochemical processes. Aside from abiotic causes, biotic factors caused by other organisms can also lead to a tree's death. Diseases, insects, fungi, bark beetles. Many pests disrupt the transport of sugar sap in the bast and bark. This part of the tree is also called phloem. They can also block the flow of water and nutrients in the wood tissue, the xylem. And we already know what happens then. Herbivores, such as leaf-eating insects like caterpillars, reduce the tree's photosynthetic capacity because they destroy the structures responsible for photosynthesis, which is also harmful to the tree. However, it is often not individual factors that lead to the death of a tree, but a combination of several. These often result in a negative spiral. Once stressors are present, susceptibility to others increases. One example for the interaction between multiple stressors is the so-called Dutch elm disease, which causes the death of elms through the fungal infection with Ophiostoma ulmi. Its spores can be spread by bark beetles, meaning that infected elms must fight both, the beetles and the fungus, and they usually lose this battle. Ophiostoma ulmi spreads within the tree, which responds by forming tumor-like growth to contain the spread. While this stops the fungus, it also blocks water transport by blocking the xylem cells, causing the tree to die within a month. In general, however, a tree's death can stretch over years, depending on the cause. In the case of the Dutch elm disease, bark beetles eventually lay their eggs in the fungus-infested dead tree, and when the next generation of adult beetles search for a new host, they carry the sticky fungal spores with them and infect additional trees. Finally, humans are also a major cause of dead wood. Vehicles or construction works can damage trees and chainsaws can fell them entirely. But felled trees rarely stay where they fall. Why would they? We need wood for construction, heating, furniture, packaging, paper, the list goes on. And that's the problem, the removal of dead material from the forest. We've now learned a lot about how deadwood forms, but we still haven't answered why it's so essential to forest ecosystems. To give you some insight into the living world of deadwood, I'm speaking now with Professor Dr. Emma Sayer from the Institute of Botany at the University of Ulm. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
You are an ecosystem ecologist and especially love to work in forests. Why are forests so fascinating to you?
Where do I start? Trees are just absolutely amazing organisms. They can live for hundreds of years, they can grow through concrete, they can pump huge amounts of water, tens of meters up into the canopy, and they can deal with all kinds of problems that humans throw at them. So obviously a whole ecosystem of trees is just an amazing thing, but also just the feel of being in the forest, the diversity, how complex forests are, how beautiful they are. Being in a forest and working in a forest is just a joy.
I can tell you have a very strong connection to the forest. In this podcast episode, we're talking about deadwood in the forest. Many people think of deadwood as just fallen branches lying around. Why is deadwood important for the forest?
Deadwood's a really important part of the forest ecosystem. So not only is it quite a large carbon store, so wood is mostly carbon, and even after a tree has died, that carbon stock's maintained often for decades until the wood has decomposed. But deadwood is a really important habitat for many, many species, insects, fungi that grow on deadwood. Deadwood also can act as a safe space to grow for seedlings. You'll see small plants, ferns, growing on top of decomposing logs because it lifts them up away from herbivores and competitors. And of course, deadwood can also store a lot of water that would otherwise maybe run off the forest floor. So it soaks up, especially older deadwood as it decomposes, can soak up an awful lot of water. And anything that soaks up a lot of water is great when there's heavy rainfall, but also acts as a kind of water store when there's drought.
You just mentioned that deadwood provides many habitats for all kinds of organisms. Does deadwood also play a role in the forest soil? For example, in terms of soil biodiversity or nutrients through decomposition?
Yes, so we know that a lot of organisms in deadwood also occur in the soil, and the soil surrounding deadwoods often has very similar communities of, say, arthropods. But I think what a lot of people don't realise is that as the wood decomposes over time, the properties of the wood change. So a lot of the carbon that is stored in the dead wood will eventually go into the soil as it's decomposed, but also the wood and soil communities or litter communities around large pieces of dead wood tend to change over time as the wood decomposes, and that contributes also to species diversity. Deadwood itself is not a great source of nutrients. It contains mostly carbon, but a lot of the wood decomposers, fungi in particular, need nitrogen to be able to process all of this carbon, and that means that deadwood can act as a nitrogen sink. So fungal hyphae go out into the soil and basically scavenge nitrogen and import it into the wood so the fungi can decompose the wood. So you'll end up with zones of lower nutrient availability around deadwood that can then also promote species diversity.
You mentioned that deadwood can take a very long time to decompose. If there's a lot of deadwood in the forest, can it also become dangerous? For example, in the case of forest fires due to drought?
So this is a bit of a tricky question because most forest fires are started by humans or human activity. Obviously, there's natural fires occurring from things like lightning strikes. Of course, if you have very dry conditions and a lot of deadwood, then yes, it could make the fire worse. In general, though, we know that large pieces of deadwood in contact with the ground tend not to worsen fires or fire intensity. In a lot of fire-prone systems that should naturally burn regularly, the amount of smaller deadwood that can fuel fires can be controlled by controlled burning. So you would have lower intensity fires that get rid of a lot of the smaller deadwood, and that then prevents large fires in future.
I already mentioned earlier that many people associate deadwood with forest trash. That might be because we are not used to seeing forests full of dead wood, since it's often cleaned away in commercial forestry. Why is that? How did the idea come about that it needs to be removed?
I never understand why people think that messy is bad. In nature, messy is good. People used to think that it was a source of pathogens, diseases and insect pests. And of course now, if we have something like spruce bark beetle in a spruce stand, then that wood is removed to make sure that there are no bark beetles left that could infect other trees. But we've really created the problem by planting monocultures. So having single species stands, you're more likely to spread pests and pathogens. If you have a diverse, complex forest that's natural or close to natural, then deadwood is not a problem and it's not a big source of pests and pathogens. And so I think this is partly the way we used to manage forests, mainly for timber production, the problems that created, and also a bit of a misunderstanding about just how important deadwood is.
Considering all the benefits deadwood has for the forest, is it being reintegrated into sustainable forestry and forest management? And if so, how?
So pretty much everywhere in Europe, including Germany and Baden-Württemberg, is moving towards this idea of closer to nature forestry, because we understand that complex, diverse forests are more resistant, more resilient to disturbances, and also often just function better as ecosystems. And deadwood is part of that concept. So deadwood belongs in a natural forest. It increases biodiversity. And so in Baden-Württemberg, there is now a concept that is old and deadwood concept that includes making sure that there is a certain amount of deadwood left in forests, but also that deadwood is seen as an important habitat. And there's this idea of habitat tree groups that also usually or almost always include deadwood that are protected as an important feature of the forest and its contribution to biodiversity. So I guess sustainable forest management, deadwood will still be removed in some cases, For example, if there is a dead tree standing next to a bench or a path or a fence, and it could harm somebody if it suddenly falls over in a storm or something, that will probably be cut down, but then it will be left lying somewhere as a habitat for other species.
When we think about our own gardens, is it possible to promote Deadwood there as well?
One easy thing, especially if you have a large garden, is quite simply to have a corner with a pile of deadwood, so dead branches or larger pieces. It could even attract hedgehogs, which is great. Gardeners love hedgehogs because they eat slugs and snails. And hedgehogs like a nice wood pile to hide in or hibernate in. These wood piles can also attract other small mammals or some small amphibians, reptiles. One thing I did, I had a very small garden, but a friend cut down a tree and I took a section of the trunk and just put it in my garden. And the idea was to sort of use it as kind of a seat. But within a very short space of time, it had plants growing all over it. The cat liked to sit on it. It attracted some, I think, carpenter bees who made a nest in it. And yeah, it became kind of a garden feature. It was fantastic.
That sounds like a real enrichment for any garden. And finally, what would you like to see for the future of the forests?
I would like to see us appreciate forests more in general, and I hope we can maybe help forests adapt to climate change and stay healthy and functioning now and in future. But in general, I would like forests to just be more resistant to human beings in general, and I'd like to see more closer to nature, sustainable forest management.
That sounds like a very good idea, especially when it comes to preserving forests for the future. Thank you very much for our conversation. I think we've learned a lot about the importance of Deadwood.
You're welcome.
Deadwood. It sounds like a dead end. But in forests, it's often the beginning of something new. A place where life emerges and biodiversity thrives, whether animals, plants or fungi. They all benefit from Deadwood. So next time when you're walking through the forest and spot a mossy, fallen trunk, take a moment. Look closely. You might discover a small, unknown universe. Thanks for listening, and if you're interested in more ecological topics, check out the Botanical Garden of Ulm University. They offer a variety of programs year-round for all age groups.